All right, well, let's get started. So thank you and welcome to the, I think this is the last panel before the last keynote. I'm very honored to be the moderator, but I'm more honored to be on the stage here with my three colleagues, if I may call you that. You've already met Akira. We have Michael Schrage and Sanjay Srivastava. And you can read their titles. I think what makes this group interesting is a number of things. These don't all define each individual, but Akira being a CIO, and we know a little bit about your company now.
Yes.
And I think we know a number of us know what your job might entail in terms of dealing directly with let's say, internal politics, but also, just getting the job done, supporting the mission, et cetera. So, whereas I think Sanjay, you're Chief Digital Officer, you play maybe a broader role with bringing in think tanks and monitoring what's going on in the industry through the venture capital community. So you take on a broader role in that sense, and then Michael being involved in research and taking perhaps even broader look at what's going on across different environments.
And voyeuristic.
And voyeuristic, yeah, okay. So Michael is our conflict person.
Correct.
So if this ever gets boring, Michael will spice it up. And
manage expectations down, John. Yes.
So I guess, obviously this is about AI and the collaboration that we all perhaps seek between AI and humans. I know a lot of the conversation up till now has touched on maybe some of the more challenging aspects, whether it's risk and compliance or cyber risks, ethics, and things of that nature. But we hope that in engaging in this conversation with you, we can talk a little bit more on the positive side. What can we do to engender that process of collaboration? So to kick this off, I'm going to ask Akira for you to start. You and I spoke a little bit about what you see as important, and one of those things that you see as important to engender that collaboration is engagement. That was the word I think you chose, and it's specifically employee engagement, but then maybe there's other stakeholders as well.
Yeah, and I think, there's the good, the bad, and the ugly. I think we talked about with this, and so I'm sure those of you who are in the room, there's people clamoring for AI all over your organization, right? Yes? And how many of them do you think they really understand what it is they're asking for, or they just want to be in the game? Do they have a problem they're trying to solve, or they just want to be in the game? So that's the first part of employee engagement that I think we all have to deal with, is making sure that we are not being flooded now and our jobs being consumed by this mass who just wants to be in a game, sometimes aimlessly, if I can put it that way. So educating them and also being a filter. We can't do everything. Some things we shouldn't be doing. I think somebody talked about, what's the criteria for a good use case? Well, I'm going to start with, we have a problem to solve, and a problem to solve that's meaningful for our business or for the employees in general. So that's kind of where I start. And then also having some thinking through around where our innovation posture is in different parts of our business, and helping employees think through where that posture is. Where should we be on the more innovative side? Where should we be experimenting and learning? And where should we just say, let's play it safe and we'll go along with the vendors we got? So that's the first part, is really in just helping employees make sense of this moment. Reducing the hype and just make sense of the moment. The other piece is really arming them to think about the risk side of it. We talked about the cyber side, and we all have phishing issues, and that game is about to be changed completely. And if your employees aren't ready for it, you better get them ready. Strap them in and get them ready, because that's coming. The third area I want to be really more optimistic about. We've all just been through a pandemic, really upsetting times. we're coming out of it now, we're trying to figure out how we manage in hybrid, is how can we use this moment in technology to deploy solutions that help with connectivity, that help employees still feel like they're in a vibrant workplace, whether they're at home, whether they're in an office, and still feel connected and keep a company culture alive. So there are three areas that I'm thinking about right now.
Michael?
I largely agree. I found many of the conversations about generative in particular, I did like the fact that people were saying that AI has become too broad an issue. There really is a difference between quote unquote legacy AI and the kind of generative stuff we see in large language models and soon, smaller models. And I think it's important to do more critical thinking, a phrase we've heard earlier. And I actually think that's one of the major things that is most misunderstood and least appreciated, and that I'm actually, as somebody involved in executive education and research, most concerned about. Because even at MIT, I would say that people's computational skills are better than their critical thinking skills. I think that it's going to be very, very hard for you to push your people, be they the developers or business colleagues, to improve their critical thinking. It's like asking people to fly. They don't have wings. I think most people have done quite well with an absence of critical thinking. And the most successful organizations using generative are, it's like Warren Buffett's line about, he was once asked, why are so many billionaires jerks? It's actually, if you have $1 billion, it brings out, if you're already a jerk, you can really afford to be a jerk with $1 billion. If you're really a lazy thinker, generative AI makes it really, really easy to be a lazy thinker. And I have the students who cheat to prove it in that regard. So I'm just going to follow up quickly and say there are three more rigorous fundamentals I'd like people to actively embrace. And this is something I do with promptathons in my advisory and exec ed classes. The first is ask people when they talk about use cases and problems to solve, where do you want to use generative to automate? And where do you want to use generative to augment, to think out loud?
I like that.
Okay? The second is there is a world of difference between output and outcomes. Generative is fantastic at generating content and things. Those are outputs. But
That's right.
How do you want to link those to outcomes? And the final thing is, it's my weasel aspect to connect to the data governance and machine learning governance. There's insight, oversight, and foresight. We're using generative to do insight. Literally every day I take a big document, not a proprietary one, dump it into a ChatGPT or Claude, and do the summarize, synthesize, prioritize, because it saves me 40 minutes of reading. That's the insight. The oversight is, I get different stuff from a meeting. It's a way of summarizing things. I can do oversight for a program, for a project. And the foresight is, yes, I actually ask ChatGPT, based on this, what are the 3 things I should be paying attention to in the next 3 months? And sometimes it gives me bibble, and sometimes it gives me something I need to pay attention to. And I think that that's what the real, with no money or kickback from Microsoft, that's really what collaboration and co-piloting is going to be.
Right. Sanjay?
You guys have covered a lot, so maybe I'll just add my 3 things that I think we've learned. And by context, we're 130,000 employees around the globe that drive digital transformation, mostly for Fortune 500 clients. On the generative AI side, we've done a ton of work around software development using generative AI. We do a lot of sales and marketing by creating these Amazon pages, short description, long description, 6 bullet points, comparative summary. You do it thousands and thousands of times for every country in the tone and color and brand of the company. A lot of work. We can now do that automatically. We do a ton of work around call centers, product support, customer service, employee portals, right? And those are very obvious in the money ones. We're doing work, for instance, looking at strawberries and blueberries growing, looking video feeds, labeling it with generative AI, and then using machine learning to forecast the date to harvest them. Or we're connecting on the back end of telemedicine portals, the sort of thing you and I go see our doctors on a video screen, and actually feeding that on the back into generative AI so that when the doctor is done, he or she actually spends less time filling in the three forms, the medical form, the office form, the insurance form, and the prescription form. And so they've gone on the average from spending 8 minutes, 4 minutes talking to the patient, 4 minutes filling forms, to 6 minutes talking to the patients, 2 minutes filling forms. So these are the kinds of things we're doing. And across that, we're learning many, many things in the pilot to production journey. But to the point about employees and people, I think 3 things come in mind. The first one is architecture. And it's how you actually encase that LLM into an application that we're talking about here. And here's the reality that we've learned the hard way. And I've been in the automation business for a long time. Everything we've done so far is basically binary. 0, 1, it's black or white, it's binary. Now for the first time, we're running a scenario where, it's not black and white, it's a probabilistic answer. You go down to the switch on the wall, you turn it on, you flip it on, the light goes on, it goes off, that's it. When you run the same things with generative AI, it'll say that there's an 86% probability that claim is correct and it should be paid. I cannot automate it, I cannot accept it, I cannot reject it.
To hell with logistic regression.
And therefore, what we need to do is to encase that large language model in an application where there's and to your point, augmentation. One of our employees is actually looking at it. They're actually making a decision. It's important to encase it in a way that when they make the decision, we learn on the back of that decision and improve the models. So how you implement LLM in the context of the human interaction becomes really important. That's the first thing. The second thing we've learned is actually about processes. And the simple truth on process is when you run any other kind of automation, and you've all done it, I've done thousands of these, you take an end-to-end process, and it could be in financial services, it could be in consumer goods, it could be in life sciences, across all these industries. And you break the process into its steps, and you take every single step, and you digitize it. And then you assemble the whole thing back together, and you've got the end-to-end value chain. It's faster, it's better, likely. It's definitely more scalable. It's definitely more less expensive, so it's more efficient. But when you do it with generative AI, when you put generative AI, it actually fundamentally changes the process. It changes the work that the human colleagues have to do after the transformation is done. So all of a sudden, it isn't just about skilling, it's actually about operating model. You have to redesign the process. You have to think about the new operating model that you need to put into place with this new process. And then you have to skill your teams to be able to do the work in this new operating model. So the second thing we've learned is generative AI, very different from implementing any AI that we've done across ERPs, orchestration, robotic automation. We've done tons of these things. And actually the way you go about it has to change completely, otherwise you sort of get shot in the foot. Maybe the third thing I'll tell you is, I said we're 130,000 employees across my technology board, which is 108 CIOs, CTOs, and CDOs from Fortune 500 companies. That number is 40 times that. One of the things we've learned is, what do we need in talent? And our biggest learning has been that and by the way, our company's made the decision, we haven't completely been able to implement it. We need to learn, maybe take a book from Page in the book of MIT. But we've made the decision that we will no longer hire for skills. What that means, now I wasn't hired because I just happened to come with the package. I was CEO of a startup that we acquired. So I guess I just got in without having to be recruited. But if I had been recruited, they would have evaluated me for my skills, my experience, the work I'd done, the references I got. What we're saying now within the company is we don't want to look at skills anymore. We want to look at attitude. We want to look for curiosity. We want to look for humility. We want to look for the aspect of learn, unlearn, and relearn. And the reason we've come to that conclusion is we've kind of navigated through prompt engineering and designing with the end process in mind, and working it through different parts of our employee base, is that the people that ask the questions, the people that want to learn and pick on the new skill sets are always way ahead of everyone else. And so 3 things I will just kind of quickly summarize, and we'll move on to questions and other things. Number 1, be thinking about the architecture of how you implement it in the context of human-AI interaction, because if you don't get that right, A, you can't automate it. B, you can't learn off of the human-AI interaction. So super important. And by the way, you can't add it at the end. So if you don't design it up front, it's a big problem. Second, really think hard about your operating model, because fundamentally what generative AI will do, it'll change the actual work. It's not going to be a faster version of what we used to do before, as was the case in automation. It's fundamentally going to be different work that the human colleagues will have to do.
Okay.
And so you have to think about operating model, you have to think about scaling, and you have to look at that. And third, think about talent, and the long arc of talent for us, we've learned, is to look for attitude over skills.
Okay, so thank you, each of you. That was great. I'm going to turn to the audience pretty soon, and so I'd ask everyone to start thinking about the questions that you're going to ask. Otherwise, I'll start calling on names. But before I do that, given what you have just described, I'd like each of you to comment, what would be different about how, if you were CIO, that's not an if for you, as CIO, what would you do differently to tackle each one of these aspects? And I'm going to go to Sanjay first. We'll come back, and then so for instance, as it relates to the UI and just the architecture and so forth. Now, if you're building an app with a probabilistic back end, you've got a data component and a UX UI component. You have the language model itself. Maybe you have multiple language models or agents and things of that nature, and you've got a whole ecosystem of input and ways you have to monitor and measure and process to build trust in the model, build trust in the app. Okay, so that's a complicated thing, something that where waterfall or agile development we were talking about earlier may or may not be well designed for. What do you do differently?
Just to frame this correctly, completely, John, I mean, there are 4 ways to implement this in any one of your companies. You guys know this, but I'll just quickly summarize it, and then we'll exclude the two ends, if you will. So one end is use ChatGPT, any other portal that's freely available. You can go look some things up, do a search, go get information, copy and paste it into the other screen. Super inefficient, no longevity, not the right way to do it. So it's a good way to try and learn in the organization, but most people move away from that. And then your fourth model is actually build your own large language model. Some of my peers are doing it. I know one of my, I live in Seattle, and I've got a group there that we work with, and they're building it because they need to build, they customize the chassis of the trucks they sell down to every single customer. Every order is custom configured. And if you went in and said, I'm going to have 3 times the full capacity, you can't just increase the size of the full tank because the center of gravity of the chassis completely changes. So you have to redesign the entire chassis. And for something like that, if you want to use large language models, you need to build a custom one. Very costly, very expensive, lots of implications. But those are 2 outliers. I suspect most of you will end up in 1 or 2 scenarios. The easy scenario, perhaps more expensive though, is you just use your software vendor, and when and if they come around with their implemented version of generative AI in their product, and we had a few of our colleagues up earlier today, Chris is a good friend of mine, ServiceNow has got a good implementation, as is Microsoft, I think you refer to Microsoft, Salesforce, et cetera, et cetera. Advantages, it's in the line of work. Disadvantages, you've got one of everything, and so now you have 16 different LLMs in 16 different applications, and you have no way of really managing that. I think most of my colleagues, certainly the work we do is in the third bullet, which is I think the mainstream, which is you rig up your own environment, which is inside your firewall. You use multi-threaded LLMs, so you want to have flexibility. You never want a single thread on any one large language model. We're learning a lot. We did a lot of work on one that we find the next one's better, either in terms of accuracy or in terms of efficiency. So you always need to have the flexibility. So the way I would design this,
Why
John,
are you leaving out RAGs?
well, I was just going to come to that.
Okay.
So the way I would design this is, on the front end, I would put that UI that allows me to capture the augmented doings of my human colleagues. In the middle, I would put the 2 things. One is this idea of a RAG, by essentially vector embedding your own documents, putting it in a knowledge graph, uploading it with the prompt itself, and then being able to restrict the narrative that comes back to within the knowledge that exists in those documents, thereby reducing and eliminating hallucinations completely. And then I think we also need a prompt. We found we need a prompt engineering layer, a kind of a meta layer of sorts that sits between you and the LLM, because when my friend Michael says, Sanjay, what's the exposure? He may mean it in a financial sense. Someone on my left side might mean it in taking a photograph. And so these things are different meanings. And so in the prompt engineering layer, we put things like when Sanjay asks for something A, he actually wants B. when John asks for D, when he says D, he actually means E. And then over the long arc of time, what ends up happening is when your employees are working on it, now with that whole thing in place, so the front side gives you the UI consistency and the feedback gathering and the augmentation. The middleware gives you the RAG and the prompt engineering layer, so you can actually continue to build your own sort of, and your data frameworks around that. And the back end are the APIs into a variety of large language models, so you have the ability to switch. That, I think, is the most likely scenario.
I'm
Okay.
going to slightly disagree with that because I really believe that CIOs, more than business units, are going to be in charge of RAGs on this. I do believe that the whole focus on interoperability is key. What I think is being overlooked here is there is an overemphasis on architecture as opposed to the notion of what are indeed the use cases, what is the, I'll use the word, the P word, what is the philosophy of the organization in regards to automation versus augmentation? And the two examples that he cited are exactly that. Where do you draw the line? Where do you think you get more value from with a generative model? From automating something or augmenting something? Most organizations haven't done that kind of rigorous thinking, okay? And if you listen to a vendor, that's, I'll quote Warren Buffett yet again, never ask a barber if you need a haircut. So the point is, I really strongly believe that generative represents an opportunity to rethink the fundamentals of the business. And CIOs are uniquely positioned to help the rest of the business rethink their fundamentals in the context of generative capabilities and other digital capabilities.
Yeah, I'm
So-
going to say,
Please.
I was going to say yes and, but.
Oh, say yes, but.
Or yes, but. I think it comes back to the augment, or I want to come back to the augment versus automate. We haven't finished our automation work.
Right.
We haven't finished our data science work. We haven't finished saturating machine learning. We haven't finished with all this. And so I also think one of our jobs as CIOs is not to get swept up in the generative AI, not that we're not doing it. We want to do it, but we've got to make sense out of the whole curve of tools that are available to us.
That's 100% right, by the way. And you know what, the thing I would say about that,
It's not even 90% right.
well,
but
here's
go
why
on.
it's, no, hold on one second. Here's what you do. The generative AI hype, if you will,
Yeah.
is so high, and every
Yeah.
board is so focused on it. You use that train to
I
drive
agree.
all of the data science,
I agree.
data foundation,
I agree.
machine learning work through. The
I
generative
like
AI
it.
is
That I
the
agree with you.
final layer.
Oh, the final, look, I agree that you're going to use it to drive this, but I want to be realistic. I was the guy who asked the question back there about technical debt on this. Yeah, here's the bad news. As Hugging Face, as generative capabilities become, as more people understand more about generative capabilities, a lot of the stuff you've invested in is going to have to be supplemented, surrounded, or supplanted. Guess which one of those three it's going to be? You don't know yet, because you don't understand the business. You haven't gone through the automation versus augmentation stuff. I'll be the person for, and it's such a pleasure to be the rare one of this. The hype is understated. The generative stuff, hype is understated. It's going to be 10x better in the next 18 months than it is now after the latest version of ChatGPT-4 dropped, which was what, yesterday?
Yeah. So, but what is, so it's 10x. What do we need to do to ensure that we get to 9x or 10.2x?
Get good CIOs.
Okay. And a good CIO would architect or step back and look at the process end to end and not go and ask augment versus.
I think
yeah?
if I had to rephrase Michael's point, the part of it that I agree with is I think the role of the CIO has changed. I don't take this the wrong way. The old role was we're all in service of someone. We're in service of the organization, so don't get me wrong on that. And forget the CIO, think about our people, right? Our people would wake up in the morning and they sort of say, let me wait and see what the business leader is asking me to do, and let me go and build up a report, and I'm going to make it so good that when I give it to my business leader, here Michael, just in this scenario, he's going to come back and say, guys, Sanjay, you did a great job, right?
Yeah,
That
love
was
it.
my mindset.
I don't even have to think.
That
just go
mindset
versus
has
it.
to change to, I get up in the morning, I interrogate the data, and I show up at Michael's desk and said, Michael, did you know?
Right.
Did you realize? Have you looked at it?
Right.
Here's what the competition is doing. Here's what the data is showing, right? So we need our teams, and by extension the CIOs, to become the drivers of the business. That's not in a negative and
But I'm
a
going to
kind
give
of
him crap
judgmental
if he does.
sense.
I'm going to give him crap if he doesn't give me a good enough dashboard.
You know what? I've got a great dashboard for him now. I can just give him an LLM and say, interrogate the data and get the answers directly.
Exactly right. You know?
Do you agree?
I agree, but I'm still going to push on. I think the magic is going to come from a combination of the generative, the machine learning, and the automation. I don't, and so I know earlier you said insights.
Right.
And I'm not sure it's proven necessarily. So when I think of insights, it's telling me something I wouldn't have figured out looking at the same data myself.
Exactly.
And I'm not sure it's delivering on that promise yet.
I will show you some of the dialogues I have with
Yes.
But you see,
It depends.
on the use case.
Yes.
And
right.
that's probably fair, but I think the combination of generative AI with the traditional AI can get me to insights, yeah.
I am not anti-traditional AI.
Yeah.
All I'm saying is that whatever your mark to market is for traditional AI or automation, and he's been in automation for a long time. What he began was like an RPA circumstances, and generative represents RPA squared, robotic process automation and augmentation, which is why things fundamentally change. That's my point. You have to fundamentally revisit. Ultimately, we'll just be doing mime up here.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, that generative is going to change how you value your legacy investment. And for many of you in the room, most of that revaluation is going to be a disappointment, not a source of joy and elation.
So one of our leaders in AI recently asked a question in a panel, and she said, how many people are proud of your data governance and your data quality?
Can we ask them now? How many
Yeah.
of you are proud of your data governance
Who's
and
got
data
rock
quality?
solid data?
Great.
One
One.
hand.
One. So if you're not proud of that,
Well, that's good because your business model sort of relies on
that's
it, right?
correct. You're from the clinical
He's the medical, right.
So you definitely want him to have good data and
Right.
data governance. So given that no one but him answered that question, how do we feel about the dichotomy of that, knowing that underlying truth, and going gung-ho into generative AI?
Well, I think to be honest, when you say gung-ho into generative AI, it's not
Well,
with the exclusion of having a data.
Right.
Right.
Otherwise, what
Yes.
are you actually
Right.
running your LLMs on?
The governance and the data management is that legacy issue that we have to fix.
Or it's part of it.
Quickly.
I think,
part of it.
but you see, this is the irony. I think, and in fairness to us, we did discuss this in my view, all of the data governance and metadata governance you're doing now matters more in a
Right.
generative environment,
Right.
not less.
Right.
And I think that's the big con, that it's still data governance, when in fact the capability of generative mean that how you train, how you do those RAGs, how you fine tune becomes way more important, and the impact of it becomes way more important.
But that's the exciting part.
I agree.
But
There
if
we agree.
We finally have a good reason to say, if
Yeah.
we do this right, imagine what it means for the business
Absolutely.
if we combine it with generative AI.
Use the generative AI momentum,
Exactly.
but get the basics in
Yes.
place. Get your data foundation in place. Get your hygiene and
Yes.
governance in place.
It's a
and
more
get your culture
compelling
and teams in place.
because.
Just to be
than
clear, I'm
before.
not saying that governance and hygiene don't matter. My
Yeah.
gosh, okay, yes.
No, I'm just saying it's a much more compelling case to get the company serious about data quality and governance than we had before.
You know, I'll give you a couple of quick examples. As I and a few of my peers rolled out, this is all Fortune 500 companies, by the way, here. Well, two examples. Number one would be, actually I'll give you just an example from our own environment. So far we had security by obscurity. which is to say that no one knew about it, so it didn't matter. Now, the email that I sent John a week ago about this, the PowerPoint I shared with my colleague last night, the Word document I wrote, all of that is discoverable. And for most of the structured data in our corporations, we've gone and classified it, we've labeled it, we applied fine-grained security. So like the checking account number is available to the branch manager, but the balance is only available to the teller or whatever the mechanisms are, right? Fine-grained security because you've classified that data. Well, guess what? You haven't really done that for your unstructured data. All of that is lying bare. So one of the things we ran into very quickly as we started enrolling this in our employee base is people are pulling up information and then we're going, oh my God, this is all discoverable. Quick example one. Quick example two, one of my colleagues rolled out, if you've used Copilot, you used the word Copilot earlier on Teams. One of the best features I like, by the way, my single best feature that I like is Friday evening on the drive back, I'll say, Teams, please summarize the messages I did not get to this week. It is the best function. It'll just kind of tell you what it is. But anyway, if you turn it on, it's got the ability to say, here's what you discussed between the four of you in a meeting. And one of the things, Sanjay, you said is you're going to send a copy of this deck to Michael. It's going to wait for 2 weeks, and 2 weeks later, it'll send me a message saying, Sanjay, just to remind you, you said you would send it in this meeting, but you haven't yet, because obviously it's watching your email. And we ran into all kinds of issues, and for instance, in Europe with workforce privacy and works councils and all that sort of stuff. Right. So lots of learnings as we're going through it.
Okay, so far, I'm going to ask the audience to chime in with questions, but so far what I'm hearing is in order to engender collaboration, we need to build apps or think about these tools in a more holistic way, not take things for granted about the business model or the business purpose. And we need to experiment, I think, is a little bit what I'm hearing there. We don't have all the answers just yet. Maybe Michael does, but not everyone else. I'm kidding.
I've got
He's
the
got
good
all
questions.
the questions.
He's
That's what
got
I
all
was
the
going to
good
say. He
questions.
has
All
all
right.
the difficult
So
questions.
questions from the audience, though.
And if you don't feel like giving a question, do a prompt.
Somebody should be, thank you. Yeah.
So I'm going to do a continuation of the Copilot Microsoft example, right? So I was just at the Microsoft conference last week, and everything was the age of the Copilots, of course. They must have said it at least 3,000 times. But if we think about, and you were just talking about metadata too, and like how it's going to get us there. So we get out of a meeting, and Copilot tells us summarize it or action items. But what if as an organization we use RAID? So we actually want it risks versus action items versus decisions versus et cetera, because we have different flows. So we have better data because maybe the project manager or the meeting manager wasn't actually taking notes before, but it's not structured in the culture or the process that we have. And Microsoft hasn't come up with a solution yet where they actually can adjust the prompts or roll it out at an enterprise level. So where do we play in this in-between where we're starting to get there? Summarization is great, prioritization is great, but we don't know the algorithms behind prioritization or have any ability to really impact that from an enterprise rollout standpoint. Does that make sense as a question?
It does to me. I think we've done 4 of those, and I wouldn't say that we've been very successful across all of them, but here's what we've learned. So if you go back and I talk about those 4 models, the middle 2 models, which is wait for like Microsoft and the Copilot to eventually get it in the roadmap and be able to summarize based on your parameters as opposed to English parameters. So that was, and then the other model, which I said is build up your own, not your large language model. You're still using a publicly available large language model, but you build up your RAG, your prompt engineering, and your interface. And I think today the only way, that's when you go cut across the line from an embedded AI in a software product to building your own version of it. And today, unfortunately, that's the only way you can get to it. We've done it 3 or 4 times. I'd say we got 80% of the way there, because the problem with that also is those parameters are changing over time. And so you have to have a mechanism to keep that in metadata. So it's, sorry if I'm taking too much time, but you want it to be configurable so that, and you have to keep it in the metadata architecture. So there's some complexity.
I just would say that I actually think the problem that you raised has been solved. You have to be prepared to iterate. I am astonished by how few organizations take the notion of prompt frameworks, chain of thought. These things exist. Serious question. How many of you have a prompt repo? See, there are a handful of hands, okay? That's where we're going to go. You will have internal GitHub, Git repos. You're going to have that connected to data science. So what are the prompts for these kinds of outcomes? Use case oriented, you'll have metadata. This is straightforward stuff. And I think that, by the way, I think that's where the next shadow IT is going on this.
Can I
There
ask?
will always be a next shadow IT.
There will always, that's
right.
truer words were never spoken.
Yeah.
So, I wanted to ask a follow-on question of the audience, if I
Actually,
may.
there's no such thing as shadow IDs. I'm just gonna, there's no such thing as shadow IT. IT is the business and business is IT. Why are we thinking about two different organizations and worrying about shadows?
I think
I guess
Go ahead.
I would.
Gray market.
I would give just a slight difference to that is IT has to expand their definition of what is IT. And I think we have to open up the tent versus we've kind of been safeguarding certain things. But certain things, I'll be honest with you, I'm not sharing in a democratic way. Other things, I do want to open it up.
That's a whole nother panel, by the way.
Agree,
Okay.
different panel.
So, but I guess maybe it's only of the two, in addition to.
There's a question.
Well, I'm sorry, I just had a follow-up to your question about having a repo. How many of the folks in the audience have built their own version of a chat GPT type of solution? So, okay.
Lots.
All right. Well, that gives you at least something to build on so that you can do what you're describing, Sanjay, and Michael. Okay. Questions?
For those of us in medical informatics, we face this huge cultural conflict. The culture of medicine has this concept of a learning healthcare system, yet with these large language models, there's not only sort of a real lack of explainability, there's this real problem with fixability. And one of the approaches that we've been taking is we're not using a large language model, we're using more of a Bayesian type of pattern matching, but we have this process that we call case-based quality improvement, where a subset of our users, the curators, are permissioned to make changes themselves instantaneously to our database. And say, oh, well, this disease was ranked too low because it didn't know.
That's called RLHF.
What?
That's called reinforcement learning human feedback.
Yeah, except it's not a behaviorist model. It's actually getting into the underlying data. But anyway, I think we need to try to reconcile these two cultures and come up with ways that we can achieve the goals in medicine, yet also provide real type of AI support that helps out. And there was somebody at MIT years ago had sent me this totally dysphoric article about how this priesthood was going to take over medicine through medical informatics. And it's just not like that. It's sort of anybody within a sort of permissions set can then come in and make changes, and they have to get through an editorial process. But it really is a learning healthcare system. It's really happening.
Dude, I'd be grateful if my gastroenterologist could have a good conversation with my hematologist, honestly.
Well, it's actually
Okay.
particularly fun when one specialist is working on a disease that another specialist would work on, and they have like two really different perspectives, but we try to reconcile all of that and sort of build that into the system, and it's fascinating process. It's fun every time it happens.
Well, by the way, your point is exactly right. You can't go into the database and start fidgeting with the numbers, because then you have lost all traceability. It has to be done at one layer above. If you let people go in and change the weights just willy-nilly, I don't know where you end up on that. I agree with your point.
Well, actually, is that true? They're not changing the weights?
They have to be changing the weights.
In the
That's-
database, not through RLHF.
No,
He's
the
saying they're
people are
going
doing
directly.
it in their individual copy, and that gets
Gotcha.
submitted to
Yeah.
the general one, and we can accept it or ding it or whatever. And so there's an editorial process, there has to be, and it doesn't change, doesn't go out to everybody else until it's been approved.
Okay. Question? Oh, 5 minutes, 5 minutes. Ari, yeah.
I kind of agree with what Michael was saying, and again, seeing an enthusiast, a cynic, and a realist, I would say. Two questions.
I don't know who's
One
who.
is that since CIOs are meant for the change management gurus or experts when we deal with system, are you guys seeing that there is another layer of change management of the augmented culture or reality or intelligent culture, which CIOs has to deal with, number one. So there is two culture. One is the people's culture, then the AI culture, because AI will develop its own augmented reality, like Michael was saying. And second thing is that, how do you think AI will deal with legal suits, which comes maybe 2 years later? Who will win? AI will win or legal team will win?
Oh. All right.
I'm not sure I caught all of that.
One is that the change management. Are we really looking at CIO changing the AI culture? Because it has an augmented intelligence in that. So now we are dealing with people. Technology can change. Now we need, see, for example, like Sanjay was saying, there is a best process or idea generated by AI, which we are following, and a new leader is coming to change it. The change management is actually challenging the AI, not just the people alone. The process is defined by AI. How do you deal with that? Second thing is that, do the AI have a chance if hundreds of legal suits come to Genpact or another insurance company, things like that?
So I'll try to take the change management part. So if I understand your question, it's the change management for HI and change management by HR. I mean, by AI.
Yeah, the AI versus human versus AI defined processes.
So I think the CIO has a role in one part of it, but it can't be the only one. I mean, it's part of the conversation we had yesterday. So I think we have roles in helping to help people understand the technology and help guide them. But I think the entire organization of leaders has a responsibility for then the other side. Now, how do we change our operating models now because of, I think you were talking about this earlier, because now we live in this augmented space. I wouldn't see that as mine alone. I think that's going to involve lots of other leadership at the table.
My answer is yes and no, and let me explain.
Yeah.
I think the yes is that the CIO absolutely needs to own the change management. And again, I think my view on this is a little different, perhaps, to what I'm picking here. I think the modern CIO is not the CIO of the past. You have to sort of roll up your sleeves and get involved in the business, and you have to be a co-pilot on the flight, not the service engineer on the flight, right? It's a very different role. And I think one of the concerns I have is when that question kind of assumes a baseline, which I disagree with. I think the baseline has to be that the CIO has to step up and drive change, and therefore change management needs to be owned. Now, obviously, it's not to the exclusion of anyone else, but I think they absolutely need to drive the change. The no part of the answer is, in the end, there will be lawsuits, but I don't think the lawsuits, I don't know how someone can drive a lawsuit against the large language model I used for one application within my environment to make a decision. The lawsuit is going to be to us in the way we structured the application, that governed the output, managed the data in it, and if all of that combined gets us to do the wrong thing, then we've done the wrong thing, right? Like, this is not a scenario I'm looking forward to, by the way. But my point is, we can't blame the LLM. We have to blame the person that put the LLM into place with the governance and the methodology to make that happen. So I think my answer is yes and no in the way you asked the question.
Okay. So we're in the closing minutes, and I'm going to ask each of the panelists to, no word limit like Dr. Westerman had on his previous panel, but maybe a few sentences on what is the most important thing to engender human and AI collaboration.
Oh gosh, what is the most important thing? I mean, I think be flexible and be excited and use the moment. So we've got a lot of human and AI perspectives. They're all very different. And I think as CIOs, one, we have to meet people where they are, leverage the momentum, and just help them understand where we can actually grow our business. The one thing I worry about is everybody wants to do AI everywhere. Well, only some of those are really going to be additive to the business, or to how people are productive in a business. So help make sense on that.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Michael?
I'm going to double down on the stuff that I'm already doing. I think you need to challenge people. You need to create a promptathon playgrounds. MIT is about mens et manus, mind and hands. You need to get people to engage, and you need to instrument and monitor those engagements and observe. You need to see which 20% of your people generate 80% of the, wow, this is interesting, and which 20% of the people generate, oh my God, keep them the F away from any device. And that's it. I do not believe, and I'll reveal my Chicago origins here, I don't believe generative AI can be centrally planned by the CIO. I believe it is GPT is a pun. In economics, GPT, generative pre-trained transformer, general purpose technology. It's a general purpose technology. Give people the chance to play and learn, test and learn, and make every possible effort to capture those learnings.
Sure. Safely.
Safely. I'm sorry, safely. But I'm an academe, so safe is a relative, except for the safe space stuff, relative.
So I'd say you have a unique opportunity, and you're in a moment of time that we must all grasp together. I look at about, I would say, almost 340, 350 different actual implementations of generative AI across a set of companies I work with, mostly in the Fortune 500, Fortune 1000. And if I had to draw a curve, and I would say step 1, step 2, step 3. Step 1 would be automation, which is efficiency, productivity, essentially dollars, right? Reduction of effort. Step 2 would be differentiation, which is experience, design, adjacencies, incremental revenue, so it's top line oriented, not bottom line. And step 3 would be disruption. You're fundamentally a different version of who you were yesterday. And the way you allocate capital, and I don't know the right answer for you, because you have to think through it yourself, but be very intentional about how you spread your dollars between those 3 categories. In other words, do not get caught up in the rush of only focusing on step 1, and 2 years from now, your board's going to be asking you, saying, where were you asleep? Why didn't you get to 2 and 3, right? So now whether it's 50, whether it's 30, 30, 30, whether it's 80, 20, 10, 10, that's a number you have to figure out, but be very intentional on capital allocation. A lot of money is going to get wasted.
All right. Thank you to each of you, and thanks to the audience for the participation. Thank you.